Good morning, everyone. Good morning, everyone. Thank you. We made it. This is the last day of a rich week of wonderful presentations and presenters, and it's been really, really fun to be here in person with all of you. I was thinking back to our last conference 2 years ago where I was doing the closing, welcome to the last day in my bedroom alone. And, I could get some high fives or like thumbs up emojis, but it was so different. I think the only thing that was possibly, a little bit better was my pants were a little bit more comfortable, but otherwise, there's really nothing like the being in person, hearing the exchange of ideas and the connections like at the table beside you, or the people lighting up when they have that kind of aha moment, and the passion and energy in the room. There's really nothing like it, and I'm so thrilled that we could all be here together. My mom's in town. She drove from Canada to visit. Oh, she's the person holding up the phone videotaping me. So, and her partner Doug is here too. And on our taxi ride or Lyft ride back, we couldn't stop talking about all the things we had learned. Then at dinner, we kept talking about all the things, basically all into the night. We couldn't stop talking about all these ideas. And I'm hearing that around the room, just all that energy of ideas. My mom also went into her Whova app last night and rated every session. She gave them all fives. And she noticed that she was almost in the top 10 on the leaderboard on Whova. She was in 11th place. I checked, I was in 89th place. And how you get points is by, sharing ideas, having meetups, evaluating sessions. And I kind of looked at the board and I wanted to just do a shout out for the people who are in the top 3 places now. Last night it was actually in 3rd place, Lindsay Knepp, I think it's pronounced. But this morning, Scarlett Blair jumped into 3rd place. So a little bit of competition here. In 2nd place is Brianna Roberts, and 1st place, Keisha Horton. And yeah, exactly. And those, the 2nd and 1st place are both from the Catherine Hershey School of Early Learning. So way to go. Thank you so much for sharing your ideas, suggesting topics, networking. It's really wonderful. And I encourage you all to get on there, and especially to be evaluating the sessions. At the end of the day, there's going to be a overall conference evaluation. So if you go into the app, on the main page, you scroll down just a little, it will say surveys. And you click on there, and it's going to have a short evaluation of our conference. We'd really love to get your ideas on what worked well, what didn't, how we can improve, and especially ideas for speakers and topics. We are going to host our next conference in the spring of 2024, so we're already starting to plan for that one. So we'd really like to have your ideas in there. So with housekeeping out of the way, it is now my pleasure to introduce Solomon Greene. He's going to be speaking about neighborhoods, housing, and economic mobility. Solomon Greene is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary for Policy Development and Research at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. Prior to joining HUD, Solomon Greene was Senior Fellow at the Urban Institute for over 7 years, where he led research on fair and affordable housing, land use, technology, and inclusive growth and recovery in cities. Before joining Urban Institute, Solomon Greene served at HUD again as senior advisor, where he helped develop policies to reduce segregation and expand neighborhood choice. He's done a ton of other things, leadership positions in research institutes, affordable housing and community development organizations, local and federal government, and philanthropy. Earned a few degrees. You can read all about it in his bio. Very impressive person. In sum, he has dedicated his career to improving people's lives and strengthening communities through evidence-based and community-driven housing and urban development policies. So, pleasure to welcome you to the stage.
Thank you so much, Ashley. Thank you, the entire team at Empath, for inviting me to join you all this morning. I don't know how to pronounce the name of the app, but I did figure out how to use it. Whova, I did figure out how to use it this morning. and made it here late last night from DC. Really excited to be part of this conference. I just want to thank all of you as well, the participants, for the work you do every day in communities to disrupt poverty and support upward mobility. And I am not going to spend a whole lot of time introducing myself. Thank you, Ashley, for that kind introduction. But I am currently the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary at HUD in charge of our Office of Policy Development and Research. And I wanted just to say a little bit about what that office does, and then in my remarks, you'll learn a little bit more about me personally. So the Office of Policy Development and Research is, the name suggests, is the research arm of HUD. And I've been in the role now for only 3 months, but this is my second time at HUD. I was there in 2014, as Ashley mentioned, working on a range of strategies to combat segregation and racial exclusion, including working on, if people know, the affirmatively furthering fair housing rule. I'm going to come back to it a little bit later in my talk, but the 2015 version of that rule. And PD&R just plays such an essential role. I'm really proud of the work it does supporting departmental priorities through rigorous research, evaluation, seeding and learning from innovation, sharing best practices. It wouldn't quite do it justice, but as a shorthand, you may think of PD&R as the think tank of the agency, but we're more than that. We also provide the numbers that support our formula allocations that you probably know are, we calculate the area median incomes and fair market rents and all of that fun stuff. So I'll talk a little bit about that as well. So even though I've only been at PD&R for 3 months, this really is, in some ways, I think, a culmination of my life's work. Throughout my career, I've sought to apply the best available research and evidence to advance HUD's mission. And HUD's mission, if you don't know it, is, and this is, it's short and sweet, to create strong, sustainable, inclusive communities and quality, affordable homes for all. And I've approached that work in HUD's mission even before I joined HUD and when I've been in other roles through 3 deeply held commitments. The first is I've dedicated my career to helping all families find and keep quality, affordable housing. This is something I grew to appreciate at an early age. I was raised by a single mother who earned so little while working full-time as a registered nurse that we received Medicaid and food stamps. We moved more than once a year through most of my childhood to find a place we could afford until my mom managed to raise just enough for a down payment on a house in a rural county in New York State. That house and that property is where my mother still lives today, along with now my brother, his wife, and my baby nephew. And it provided the stability I think I needed to be able to focus on school and my future. And I truly believe it was that transformation that enables me to stand here before you today to serve in this role. Ashley mentioned a couple of career degrees along the way, really wouldn't have been possible with the conditions and the environment I grew up in if we didn't have stable housing. So I've been dedicated my career to making sure that others had that same opportunity. This experience also taught me that a home is more than a roof over your head. It's also a platform for health and well-being and a down payment on your children's future. And I think that'll be a big theme of the panel that follows my talk. So second big commitment is I believe that evidence-based housing and community development policies can help ensure that every child has a fair shot in life. I think of the American dream as the idea that no matter who you are, where you come from, if you work hard and give it your all, you will succeed. And I've dedicated my career to ensuring that where you come from does not determine who you can become later in life. In my research, I study the policies that shape communities and the opportunities they afford their residents. And for years, I've worked with federal, state, and local leaders to design and test policies that revitalize communities, expand neighborhood choices, and boost upward mobility. And finally, and most importantly for this current role, I also am passionate about using data and evidence to inform public policy decisions at all levels of government. And I do believe that research can help bring together practitioners, advocates, community leaders, and policymakers to identify evidence-based and data-driven policy solutions to our nation's most pressing housing and community development challenges. And I believe research can provide diverse stakeholders who hold different viewpoints and values a common frame through which to assess problems and identify solutions. So this morning, I'm going to focus on that second commitment, ensuring that where you come from does not determine who you can become later in life. More specifically, I'm going to focus on the role that neighborhoods play in alleviating poverty and promoting upward mobility. So why this focus? The first commitment, as I mentioned, on stable and affordable housing, I think will be a big theme of the panel that follows, and I look forward to listening in and learning from the panelists then. But second, I think it's the part of HUD's mission that is most often overlooked. So it's that first phrase, to create strong, sustainable, and inclusive communities. And I want to talk a little bit about that part of our work. So as a researcher, I know how important, the phrase place matters, is used all the time. There's a growing body of evidence to demonstrate the importance, often described as neighborhood effects literature, but more broadly, and we heard some of that evidence, or you all heard some of that evidence yesterday, and what I understand was a really engaging and enlightening conversation between Professors Raj Chetty and Dolores Acevedo Garcia, who are both leaders in that field and have really reinforced the importance of place in our public consciousness. And also the idea that zip code should not determine our destiny has broad appeal, and it transcends, I think, partisan divides. But this recognition and this commitment tells us little about what we can do about it. How can we sever the link between zip codes and life outcomes? What can we do to ensure that every neighborhood is a springboard for opportunity for its residents? I think the lack of clear answers to these questions has led to some tension and even some paralysis in the field and among policymakers. For example, many advocates and community residents argue passionately to reinvest in places that have been chronically disinvested, to strengthen their assets and transform them into places of opportunity. And increasingly, we see urgent calls for strategies to prevent displacement and preserve affordable housing in neighborhoods that are seeing renewed investment, including gentrifying neighborhoods. And then, of course, still other argues with equal passion and force that for the importance of neighborhood choice in breaking down exclusionary barriers in neighborhoods we may think of as opportunity hoarding and creating more access to those neighborhoods. And I would argue we need to do all three simultaneously and with equal vigor. My former colleague from the Urban Institute, Marjorie Austin Turner, has described this as a shift from place-based to place-conscious strategies. Others can call it a both-and approach. Some of us call it a portfolio approach, a balanced approach. I might just call it an equitable approach to neighborhood investment. And why do I say this? Well, we know that government policies at all levels help to create and sustain the uneven patterns of investment and access to opportunity that we see today. I'll just give you some examples. Hopefully they're familiar to you all already. Credit redlining starved low-income communities of color of access to capital with long-standing effects that remain painfully apparent today. Federally subsidized highway construction promoted white flight from urban areas and was accompanied by local exclusionary zoning and other policies that prevented racial and income mixing in whiter and wealthier suburbs. And we know the history of urban renewal that cleared away communities of color in the name of blight removal and improvement. So if we know that public policies created these uneven patterns of investment and access to opportunity, sustained chronic disinvestment in low-income communities and communities of color, and promoted opportunity hoarding in whiter and wealthier neighborhoods, we also know that public policies can and must unwind these patterns. I think President Biden shares this recognition. In his first week in office, he issued a presidential memorandum called Redressing Our Nation's and the Federal Government's History of Discriminatory Housing Policies and Practices, which for the first time is the first presidential statement which explicitly acknowledged the history I just mentioned and committed HUD and other federal agencies to work with communities to lift barriers that restrict housing and neighborhood choice and to promote diverse and inclusive communities. White House also created an interagency policy council on equitable development that I and my team are honored to serve on, along with our colleagues from HUD's Office of Community Planning and Development. Okay, so now what is HUD doing to advance equitable development and that commitment to create strong, sustainable, and inclusive communities? So first, we are supporting comprehensive community revitalization and reinvestment strategies in low-income and historically disinvested communities. Many of you are probably familiar with our CDBG program. It's one of HUD's largest programs. It's our most flexible resources that go to state and local governments. It can be used to improve access to safe and decent housing, provide necessary services and economic opportunity within low-income communities. The President's fiscal year 23 budget proposes to expand the CDBG program, including $195 million in targeted resources to revitalize 100 of the most historically underserved and underinvested neighborhoods in the country. You may also be familiar with our Choice Neighborhoods program, which supports the revitalization of communities through the creation of new mixed-income housing developments with comprehensive social services and physical neighborhood improvements. And one of the important goals of the Choice program is to create conditions necessary for public and private investment in distressed neighborhoods to offer those opportunity-enhancing amenities. You may also be familiar with our RAD program, which is used to finance the revitalization and improvement of public housing. To date, RAD has facilitated more than $14.5 billion in capital investment to improve or replace nearly 175,000 affordable homes across the country, most of which house extremely low-income families, seniors, and people with disabilities. Second, we are working to preserve existing affordable housing opportunities in neighborhoods where we are seeing increased investment and displacement pressures. So one I want to mention that's very recent is we just launched a partnership with the Department of Transportation called Thriving Communities. So many of you are tracking what's happening with those infrastructure and transportation funds through the bilateral infrastructure law. Certainly, some of the biggest infusion of capital state and local governments are going to see to address transportation infrastructure needs in recent memory. But we're also, as housers and people concerned with alleviating poverty, want to make sure those investments reach the people that need them most and don't result in additional displacement or housing cost pressures. So the Thriving Communities program is a partnership between HUD and DOT. We just both announced a notice of funding availability that total across our two agencies $30 million, and to support TA to local jurisdictions to help build housing and economic mobility strategies into their use of those transportation infrastructure dollars. So third and finally, we're helping to lift exclusionary barriers to promote access to affordable housing across a broader range of neighborhoods. This is where I'm going to come back to that, the affirmatively furthering fair housing, which is a commitment in the Fair Housing Act of 1968 that federal housing dollars should be used to break down those exclusionary barriers and promote more integrated residential patterns. And unfortunately, for far too long, that provision of the Fair Housing Act wasn't enforced. We did release a rule in 2015 that would require local jurisdictions that receive HUD funding to engage in comprehensive fair housing planning. And unfortunately, that rule was suspended in the prior administration, and we're working on, we've already partially restored the rule and working on getting it into effect as quickly as possible. I should also just mention on the exclusionary barriers and access to affordable housing across a broader range of neighborhoods, the importance of our housing choice voucher program, which is designed to not only provide housing affordability and stability, but also increase neighborhood choices. And my office has been working with our Office of Public and Indian Housing on a community choice demonstration program, which allows housing authorities more flexibility and resources, including to create mobility services for voucher holders. So these are just a few of the commitments that HUD is taking to advance that part of our mission of creating strong, sustainable, and inclusive communities. I welcome questions about any of these efforts during the Q&A or ideas you have of what more we can be doing. And before we go to the Q&A, I just want to tee up one other idea for the discussion. So remember my third commitment about evidence-based policymaking. That's not just my commitment, that is exactly what my office does. But I also realize and firmly believe that in order to transform, that this involves centering the perspectives and insights of people and communities that have faced the greatest barriers to opportunity. I think this cuts across all of the strategies I mentioned earlier. After all, you can't have equitable development unless the people who are most affected by development have a say and a voice in their community's future. So in addition to the traditional quantitative research methods and program evaluation and access to our tremendous data assets that our office does so well, I'm looking for ways to incorporate lived experience into our research and policy development, including through community-engaged and participatory research methods. We've made some progress in this regard, but I know this is a room full of people who have ideas on that front, and I welcome your contributions to how we can do better. Thank you so much, and again, appreciate the opportunity and look forward to the discussion.
Okay, great. So I'm here from Cincinnati and live in Dayton. And these are two communities where we have a lot of homeowner to investor transfers. Mm-hmm. So homeowners are selling their homes to institutional investors primarily for rental units. And that is a challenge for our neighborhood. It's a challenge for renters, and it's a challenge for people trying to buy homes. And so Bruce Katz put out a study that actually I'm just in the middle of reading about the impact of institutional investors calling for a federal or federalist commission on these things. I was just wondering if you know kind of what the discussion around HUD has been and how can HUD partner with local communities to address this concern.
Great. I can answer the first part of your question, and then I may turn the second part back to the audience about how we can better partner with communities. So yes, very aware of this issue, as is the Secretary and leadership across the agency. And the Secretary of HUD, Secretary Fudge, has spoken out about one of her strong commitments is to make sure that community ownership, we preserve community ownership, particularly in our single family stock, which is rapidly, we're losing home ownership, particularly in communities of color, to investors who are buying properties, often turning them into single family rentals. In our own, we are multifamily housing and single family housing functions within the HUD's Office of Housing, which is a sort of confusing name because we all do housing at HUD. But when we do lending or underwriting of mortgages, we have made sure that when we have distressed assets, our Office of Housing has taken steps to make sure that when we dispose of those assets, they go to mission-driven entities as opposed to institutional investors. We're also hosting this is actually going to be the theme of our next PD&R, my office's quarterly meeting. We meet quarterly to bring together the best research and evidence and try and identify new solutions. on a topic of pressing concern, and it's going to focus on institutional investors. That'll be, I believe, the first week of December, and I would love for folks to join that conversation with us. So I know it is an important issue. We're doing what we can and know we need to do more within what's in our control, but welcome thoughts as to what we can be doing more in partnership with communities.
Hi, I have a question. I'm Ruthie Lieberman from Empath, and we've had the opportunity to partner with Boston Housing Authority and HUD to do some work on choice. And I just was wondering if you could share a little bit more about what's happening at the federal level in terms of embedding economic mobility into housing redevelopment and the existing public housing programs across the nation.
Yeah, great question. So it's not just choice. I think choice, that is very central to the mission of choice. Choice is still leanly funded, I will say. So it is not, it's a competitive program, and only a fraction of I think housing authorities and developments that could benefit from it receive those funds. We'd love to see, and we repeatedly ask for more money for the choice program. But it's not the only tool we have. We also have several more service-oriented programs in public housing, like Jobs Plus, Family Self-Sufficiency, and the role we work. So our role, we always go hand in hand. My office always goes hand in hand with the program office that administers those programs, to try and help them improve their delivery, right? We also do a lot of the work. When I said we need more money, my office is often providing the evidence to show what's working and what's not, to work with appropriators to make sure we have the resources. But setting aside the budgetary process, HUD, as part of our evidence-based commitment to evidence-based, not just policymaking, but also program development, work with those program offices. And we just put out our first evaluation of the Family Self-Sufficiency Program, and another one is forthcoming, the Jobs Plus program. We do also work with our partners in public housing on the Choice Neighborhood Training and Institute, so that they build a knowledge-sharing community among grantees. So yes, I think HUD has that commitment. The challenge, and I actually think there is, on our kind of economic mobility efforts, there is somewhat more broad and bipartisan support, although the resources haven't necessarily flowed at the same level. But I think there's more we could be doing as well, and also welcome your thoughts. But I want to say choice is more focused on the physical aspects and does have a service component, but we also have a range of service-oriented economic mobility programs within our Office of Public and Indian Housing. Other questions? 1 minute. I'm really trying to, is everybody upping me on the whoova? Whoova? Any other questions? Or any from the interwebs? Okay, good. I'll answer the harder one. How about that? Okay. Well, what kind of programs have you done to help with affordable housing? Well, we're going to hear more about the housing-specific programs. I will say, my background, the other thing I didn't really talk about is I'm trained as an urban planner and a land use lawyer. So, and my interest in I'm at HUD, and I do a lot of work with our assisted housing programs. But you all know, I think, that only 1 in 4 people who qualify for federal housing assistance receive it, which means that the vast majority of people who need stable and affordable housing don't get the resources that they need. So I'd love to see greater resources. I'd love to see everyone who qualifies for a housing voucher, everyone who qualifies for rental assistance of any form receive it. But that's not our current reality. So one of the things we're also working on, in addition to our constant ask for more resources from Congress, including two things in the president's current budget request, the fiscal year 23 budget request, requesting 200,000 new housing vouchers, which would be the largest expansion in the program. And we also, there is a housing supply fund request. And I believe it's 30 billion, I can't remember, which is going to be more focused on, kind of lifting those supply barriers that not only create challenges for people who don't qualify for or don't receive federal assistance, but also mean our housing dollars don't go as far as they should, right? I mean, if you work on housing choice, I should mention one other thing my office has done is if you work on the housing voucher program, I mean, we have people from the Boston Housing Authority here, I'm sure you would say this, that we are increasingly seeing vouchers difficult to place, not just because of challenges with recruiting landlord participation, but because the costs are so high. And one of the things our office did is this year we released the fiscal year 23 fair market rents, which set that cap for how much HUD will reimburse. And because of rapid inflation, because of also some data quality issues due to the pandemic, we ended up using private data this year to calculate fair market rents, which was a first for HUD. And typically fair market rents would go up by 4% on average since 2016. But this year they went up by 10%. And in some places, particularly high areas that saw some of the greatest rent increases over the past year, went up by as much as 30%, which really makes those vouchers. So remember, this is how much we'll pay, not how much the voucher holder will pay, so it means that there are more opportunities to use those vouchers, and your phone just froze. But I think we may be out of time, so I didn't actually, apologies Sue's question, I didn't answer, I didn't see it. So I didn't mean to cut you short, but I know we have a great panel ahead and don't want to eat into that. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, we're at our break time, and so there's going to be a panel in this room on continuing this discussion in a way on housing as a platform for economic mobility. And in the alumni lounge downstairs, I have to actually look up the exact title. It's Anthony Barrows, great speaker, who is speaking about the new view on behavioral design and social policy. So that will be on the second floor in the Alumni Lounge. Help yourself to coffee and treats. And thanks again to Solomon Greene.